Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January Mountaineers program. I'm Tony Taylor. I'm the president of the Mountaineers this year. So we have a few things on the agenda before the main talk that I know everyone's looking forward to. First of all, I wanted to update you folks on the 2022 Los Alamos Mountaineers financial audit. We have a committee, Evan Rose, Stuart Trugman, and Tanya Pietras, who are working on the audit. And hopefully we will be able to report on it at the next meeting, the February meeting. We will also have an update on the climbing school by Bill Prudhoe. We're really excited that we're going to be able to offer a climbing school this year. We haven't done it for several years, partly because of COVID. And then we have trip reports and upcoming trips by our trip coordinator, Jeff Click, and finally our main presentation. So now I'll pass it over to Bill to give us an update on the climbing school.
So next slide, please. So we are indeed having a climbing school, which has been an integrating and central element of the club since, goodness knows, sometime in the 1950s, as far as we can tell. In this modern era, we've chosen to work in partnership with a climbing company that guides and teaches climbing. That outfit is called Mountain Skills of Taos. They are very excited to work with us. They've heard about the Mountaineers. They were considered almost a privilege to put on the Mountaineers Climbing School. It will be similar to what we've done in the past, four outdoor sessions, a couple of classroom sessions. The outdoor sessions will be on ground that the Mountain Skills is permitted for, probably largely at Tres Piedras. A little bit of a drive. We'll organize carpooling to get up there. Because we're dealing with a professional organization for this, we can't offer the dirt cheap prices that we were able to do once when this was an all-volunteer organization. But still, $650 for something like 30 hours of instruction is not a bad price. And if there are folks who would like to take the course for whom money is an object, we are pulling together 2 scholarships, which one can apply for. Details on the Mountaineers webpage. We are soliciting from individual Mountaineers a little more money to cover these scholarships. We've got like one of them and half of them covered. They certainly will be covered, and so they are an option. But if you'd like to help, because the names that we're putting on these scholarships are people who have been very important to the club over the years, and it's an honor to be able to honor them. Jan Studebaker, who passed away last year. Don Liska passed away a few years before that. Alice Liska, also a life member and still with us. So their names are on the scholarships. People who donate to the scholarships are not only helping a worthy would-be climber, but also honoring some people who've been important to us. So, please sign up, and the folks ask them to sign up. This is not a course for climbers, it's a course for people to become climbers from a standing start.
Okay, next up is Jeff Click for our trip reports and upcoming trips.
Okay, let's see if I can. So these are trip reports from December through January. We had an Aspen Vista ski and snowshoe on New Year's Eve day, and we had, how many did we have? We had about 9 on that trip. Annette and I led that trip. Had actually really great snow, although there was not much in Los Alamos at the time. This is a nice picture of Cecile with snowflock trees in the back. On our way up, we just took the road up and made it all the way up to the top, and all the radio towers were extremely flocked, as you can see. And we also had a Crumbers Pass ski on the 7th. Gene Dewart facilitated that. Oh, thanks. And we had a good group of folks joined us on that trip with great snow conditions up there. And then Bill led a trip to Monarch Pass. It's an annual trip. It's a great trip if you have not done that. And he had Evan Rose and Tony and Taylor and Stewart and John Pianezza were on that. I've done that trip, and Bill has a great ranch house that he gets every year for that. It's really a great trip. I encourage you to consider that next year. And there's a picture of John on the snowshoeing part of that, and Tony. And then we had a trip led by Zach Baker, Las Conchas to East Fork Trailhead, ski snowshoe, and with a nice group. I think they had about 13 on that. And that's what that looked like the very next day. I was out there skiing in Las Conchas, and what a difference a day makes in terms of the amount of snow. Then Patty Walls has been on a trip. This is a personal trip, Jordan in Egypt. And there's her on a camel. I think that's got to be the most photogenic camel I have ever seen. Look at him posing for that. Of course, Patty's very photogenic too, I must admit. And exploratory ski. This is a personal trip that I did just this past Sunday, skiing out of Pajarito, up out to Cañada Bonita, up north at Cañada Bonita, back down to Pipeline, and then down Pipeline into the Valle Toledo. And this right here is what that road into Valle Toledo looks like. There's about probably 30 trees down on that road, but remarkably it was skiable. That's a nice little panoramic view of the Valle Toledo there. So I know Zach was talking about potentially doing a trip to Pajarito to the Caldera Visitor Center. We like to do that annually. The conditions are perfect for that right now, because even though there were so many trees down, you could get under the ones that were just tall enough to get under, and you could get over on the right hand side the ones that because there was just the perfect amount of snow for getting under or getting over. So I'm going to talk to Zach and see if we can get that scheduled. So future upcoming trips, I forgot to get those added to the slides, but I have them here. So we have on April 8th, Evan Rose is leading a trip to Cabazon Peak. April 12th through the 16th, we have a trip that Bill's leading, canyon hiking in the Comb Ridge and White Canyon area. May 6th to the 14th, Bill is also leading a Yama trip to the Deer Creek Hoodoos. Bill, is there still room in that trip? Got a waiting list, okay. But there usually are last minute cancellations on these kinds of trips, so I encourage you to contact Bill if you're interested. July 13, hiking and fishing in the Upper Conejos Valley, also led by Bill. And then Tanya's got a trip that we just posted this last week, Tanya Pietras, Gates of the Arctic National Park. This looks like a great trip, all off trail for about 10 days. In deep backcountry wilderness above the Arctic Circle. So that just looks like a really exciting trip. I'm seeing if I can figure out a way to do that. And then Bill's leading a trip on the Middle Fork of the Salmon with music with a great guiding company around September 2nd. Have you set dates yet? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And is that trip full yet, Bill? That's got a waiting list. Also got a waiting list.
We gave up our slots because we didn't fill the whole raft trip. So now the waiting list is controlled by the company.
Got it. For those of you who didn't hear, Bill says they gave up their slots because they hadn't filled it up, and now the waiting list is held by the rafting company. Okay, and without further ado, we'll go to the next topic, which I think is introduction to our speakers with Juliana.
So I'm going to jump in before Juliana.
Sure.
Good.
And just say good evening and thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Beth Courtwright. I'm the operations manager here at Peak at Pajarito Environmental Education Center, and I will be the moderator for tonight's talk. So just a few logistics really quick for this presentation before we get started. Our presenter will be taking questions via Zoom chat and from our in-person audience. For those of you watching from home, you can find the chat feature. You know what? Hold on one second. We're having a little bit of a trouble here seeing our slides. We'll try to, and without further ado, and hopefully without any more technical difficulties, I'll pass it over to Juliana to introduce our speakers.
Okay, I'll start. So I'm Juliana Fessenden, and I am the new program chair this year. And as such, I look to fill our calendar. And we've got a lot of exciting talks that are already scheduled, going from starting with Lucy and Wes's talk on the driving adventure they did to Tuktoyaktuk. No, I'm not going to say it right. Tuktoyaktuk and Prudhoe Bay. In February, we've got Mary Thompson talking to us about kayaking. We've got a fishing talk in March. We've got another hiking talk in April. We've got a nice agenda. We'll send it out. And so we do this every the fourth Tuesday of the month. So hopefully we have lots of good adventures to share with you. And so with that, I'm going to get out of the way and hand it over to Lucy and Wes.
Thank you.
All right.
So this is a very informal talk that's more slideshow and travelogue than anything structured or rehearsed. And as has been said, please feel free to chime in with any questions or as we go. So this is the overview of my whole trip. It's not an entirely accurate map, but it gives you a general idea. The whole thing was about 16,000 miles total driving. It took me 9 weeks from Los Alamos up through Western Canada, up to Alaska and back down. Wes flew in and joined in Fairbanks for a couple of weeks for that section of the trip. So I'll start with the first part of the trip and Wes will chime in when he comes into the picture. So I've been vaguely planning a trip to Alaska since I was a little kid. There's a whole thing where I grew up in Ohio. A friend and I found some random library book about the Iditarod and Balto and Alaska, and we're just fascinated. And then discovered that Balto in dead stuffed form is actually at the Cleveland Natural History Museum for odd historical reasons. And that was awesome. And so since then, really, in vague terms, I thought, well, someday I'm going to go and drive all the way up to Alaska and back and see all of that, northern expanse of the continent, but not really seriously. And then a few years ago, I decided to get more serious about this. At that point, I've done plenty of road trips and camping trips and felt confident that I could actually plausibly do this. So in January 2020, I decided to get a little more serious about this and start talking to people at work about how much time can I take off and how does this work. And then, of course, so then at that point, I was planning to do this the summer of 2021, then pandemic. So I both had a lot of time during lockdown to do planning. And then it didn't happen in 2021 because summer of 2021, you were not allowed to drive into Canada. So everything got postponed a year and I had even more time to plan. So what I have here is some of the stuff. So during lockdown in 2020, I got myself a corkboard and literally went through and was route planning with a piece of string because I had the time and I could do that. And with the map here, which is from the Alaska Milepost book, which if you ever want to plan a trip to Alaska, that's the book to get. It goes through in exhaustive detail pretty much any route you could possibly want to go on between here and there, in all types of detail about road conditions and where there's gas stations and random roadside stops to make and all sorts of fun stuff. So that was part of my route planning. I have a spreadsheet that I put together with distances between places to try to figure out where I'm going to be, where I wanted to stay, and which routes I wanted to take, and which roads I actually wanted to go on. And then also did the planning of logistically, how am I going to fit all of my camping stuff that I want to take with me in my car, while also having the option to sleep in my car, either due to weather conditions or bears and things like that. So I took the back seats of my Subaru out, which is the top left picture is the back of my Subaru without the seats. And then the bottom right is after I put together a plywood platform to go on top of my new full-size spare tire and that empty space where there used to be seats, which gave me extra storage space underneath the seats and a nice flat surface, which is just the right length for me at least to sleep on if I wanted to. So starting out, this is about the first 3 weeks of the trip, which was here all the way up to the Arctic Ocean. I've tried to be clever and have a little map with a star about where the pictures are in the bottom right there. Yes, question.
So there's one question online to repeat the name of the book that you use, and I can type it into the chat as well.
The Alaska Milepost, which is issued yearly, so you can get the latest update on everything. Yeah, so on each of the slides, I have a map, which again is a approximation of where this is for here. So start out, I drove north and pretty much beelined up to the border in the interest of getting to places I hadn't been to before. So I drove up through Colorado, Montana, and up into southern Alberta and British Columbia. So this is in Yoho National Park and Kootenay National Park, which are just west of Banff and Jasper, where that's one of my first campsites, and some of the hikes that I did there, out to the paint pots, which are geothermal features with various chemistry going on that I am not an expert in, but makes pretty colors. And Marble Canyon, which isn't actually marble, but looks like it's marble. And my first bear sighting, which is pictured here, which is from inside my car, so perfectly fine, no problems. Also in Yoho National Park, then the first big hike that I did, well, relatively big, was around Emerald Lake, which is the lake here, and then you go up a couple thousand feet to a little valley in the mountains, which is the top right picture, which is basically the start of the stream that goes down into the lake, which is about probably 7-8 mile hike. Not that technically difficult, but beautiful. They also have odd railway tunnels going on. And so this is pictures I took mostly for my nephew who's obsessed with trains. But they have these 2 spiral tunnels where, because of the terrain, they needed to do really abrupt turns and could not build that. So they built 2 tunnels where the entrances and the exits are like at 90 degrees from each other. And so the train goes in and goes around a circle and then comes back out going the other direction, which sadly I was not there to see an actual train go through, but it is still an active site. So these are from the drive from Banff up to Jasper, which is a gorgeous stretch of road. And one of many places in this trip where I need to go back and spend like a month just in that area and do some more hiking and stuff, because this was pretty much a day doing that drive and stopping for little walks and such along the way. See some nice shedding mountain goats and gorgeous glacier lakes and mountains everywhere. Then from Jasper, there's a tram you can take up to the top of Whistler Mountain. And this is where I first realized the elevation just works differently as you go north. So you go up this tram and you get up at the top, and it feels like you're at like 13,000 feet around here. Like it's that kind of a terrain. But it's really about the elevation here at the bottom of the train, which just messed with my head for most of the trip. Because you see these big rocky mountains, and it's like that's a 5,000 foot mountain. That's just very strange. But also, gorgeous, and I got really lucky with weather there. This is then also in Jasper. Around there, I did a couple shorter hikes, saw some elk, saw all sorts of water. There's so much water. Then driving north, so this is where I started into territory that I had never been to before. I hadn't gone that far north before. And also where the bugs started. So the picture in the middle there is from me inside of my little pop-up bug shelter that I had gotten, not entirely knowing sure if I would actually need it, but I was incredibly thankful to have it. It's a like 6x6x6 pop-up thing that you can set up in 30 seconds or something. It takes a little bit longer to disassemble, but is just a screen tent basically. And that was necessary for a good chunk of this trip at the beginning, because there's just flies and mosquitoes and it's insane. So I didn't actually drive on the Alaska Highway proper at this part of the trip. I was going further west and north, but I figured I wanted to go to the start. So I did a side trip to Dawson Creek to see the world famous Alaska Highway starting sign. And then also in that area, there's beavers, and the town of Beaver Lodge, which is the giant beaver statue here, typical roadside attraction. And then there was another little town that I stopped at, Manning in Alberta, which is where the moose statue is from. And there I talked to a gentleman at their tourist station who was clearly very happy to have a visitor. He was telling me all about the area, which historically was the home of a lot of outfitters who would go out moose hunting and such from there. And so the welcome to town sign is welcome to Manning, land of the mighty moose. And they have this statue, which the gentleman told me that the locals don't like the statue because it's the front end of a moose and the back end of a horse. And the sculptor clearly didn't know what a moose looks like. Which I not that I'm that familiar with the back end of a moose, but I can see that, yes, that looks like a horse. So then this is going into across the border into the Northwest Territories, where there is so much water. Right, coming from New Mexico especially, it's just crazy. I mean, it's just massive waterfalls and rivers and lakes, and it's just huge. I mean, everything is big. So there's a bunch of little territorial parks just off the main road where I could stop and stretch my legs and go for a bit of hike. There's one part where there's a spiral staircase where you go down to a viewpoint at the falls. And another thing that I had never seen. So there's this little trail that parallels the road for a bit between two sets of waterfalls. And at one point along the way, there's an emergency exit sign that directs you from the trail back to the road. But at which point you're like 10 feet away from the road. So I don't know why there's a sign, but that was very amusing to me. The picture in the middle here is the mouth of the Mackenzie River, where that exits the Great Slave Lake, where it's, the Mackenzie River is massive all along its length, but especially at the beginning here, it's just crazily long. Okay, so then further up into the Northwest Territories, going up to Yellowknife, there's a whole bunch of wood bison. So there's a wood bison national park in northern Alberta, which I visited slightly later in the trip here. But I didn't actually see any wood bison in Wood Bison National Park, but I saw them in the Mackenzie Bison Sanctuary, which is on both sides of the road on the way up to Yellowknife. And it's not a very traveled road, so there's not that much traffic, but many times where bison just hanging out in the middle of the road, as the deer do here in town. And they're just not bothered by the cars who come up. You just have to wait until they decide to wander off. The picture on the top left here is a just opened road, which I did not drive on, which goes up to the little town of Wati, which is like 30 miles, 40 miles maybe, where previously it was a winter road and now there's an all-purpose road. But I had been warned by several people I talked to along the way that everybody who drives on that road gets flat tires. There's too many spiky rocks, so I didn't go that way. And then in Yellowknife, I went to the museum there, which is the map in the bottom left is a picture of one of the signs there, which is all or at least some of the trails and trapping routes that were used by the native people in the Northwest Northern Territories. So it's probably too small to actually see anything useful, but on the bottom right is the Great Slave Lake. So Yellowknife is on the north edge of that. And then the top left of this is Alaska. So it goes up to Dawson City. And it's kind of interesting how now, I mean, you can't drive most of those places. You can't travel those places. It's still just trails or, where you can travel much more easily in the winter. And there used to be giant beavers, which is the picture of the beavers, which I hadn't realized. Yes. Yes. So the question is whether the trails of the Dene and the sign here, whether they're related to the Dene, the Navajo around here. I don't know all the details of historical associations, but I talked to several people who said they had visited their distant cousins in the New Mexico area. So yes, there is some historical connection. So in Yellowknife, I had timed my trip so that I could go to the Yellowknife Folk Festival, which was a really cool experience. I mean, I like folk music. It was great fun. They interpret folk very widely, and so there was all sorts of different genres of music, including a metal band who is called Narwhal with a G, which is like the best band name ever. And so I got myself a T-shirt, which is metal, iconography with a narwhal, which is just wonderful. And they close it out on Sunday night at midnight as the sun's going down with the Dene drummers up on stage. So, dozens of drummers and everybody dancing in the audience. And that was awesome. So bugs, they were a thing. So this is driving back south then from Yellowknife down to Fort Smith, which is on the southern edge of the Great Slave Lake. And this is, so the bugs were bad in Yellowknife. And I discovered things like mosquitoes can bite me through my jeans and fun things like that. But here's where I really pulled out my head net, and it was definitely necessary. This picture where I have several mosquitoes on me is after I had shooed away the mosquitoes to take a picture of myself, and there's like 4 or 5 that came back in those 30 seconds or less. The other pictures here are in, well, the one in the middle and the one on the bottom are in Wood Buffalo National Park. The picture on the top left is a little territorial park where their picnic shelters are all enclosed due to bugs. Not for the winter, but just because you cannot have a picnic outside in the summer or you will get eaten alive by bugs. So it's all enclosed. And then the picture in the middle on the left is the cut for an ice road. So in the winter, that's a road. In the summer, it's a swamp. This is one of my favorite campgrounds that I stayed at along the ways, where I got a photocopy of a hand-drawn map of the Tomstone Territorial Park, which noted helpful things like where you can go see waterfalls and don't fall off the cliff and don't get eaten by bears and all sorts of fun things like that. And then the other pictures here are from right by that campground. So that's the campground's right on the other side of the road, or the other side of that bridge. And then the river's going through, and it's all beautiful. So more buffalo. This guy was hanging out in the middle of the bridge. Big long bridge across the river. The buffalo is just standing there in the middle, oblivious to everything. So I drove up very slowly and very carefully, went right past it, and it just stood there. It was fine. So I went to Fort Simpson, which requires you go across. There's a ferry in the summer. There's a ice bridge in the winter. And so there's the signs, which is one in the middle, which is indicating that the ice crossing is closed. And in the winter, that will be modified to have both whether you can drive cars and trucks across it and what the allowed weights are at any given time. And there's a whole bunch of signs like that all along the way, where it's let you know if you can actually pass. So the picture in the middle on the right is looking across to the Fort Simpson ski hill. So, which is really just a group of people in the last couple of years went up and cut down some trees on a slope, and now they have a ski hill. And I guess the bottom picture then is from Tombstone Territorial Park, where they had the worst bugs of the whole trip, and forest fire smoke, which was great fun. Then this is back in northern, so the road from Northwest Territory is, you don't have option, you go back south before you can go back north. So this is back in northern British Columbia. I stopped in Fort Nelson and talked to some people there about what to do, and then stopped at Stone Mountain Provincial Park, which is the most of the pictures here, and did a few mile hike off the road up into the mountains and enjoyed the views. There's a hot springs at the Liard Hot Springs, which is the picture at the bottom in the middle there, and there's actual like hot springs that you can go sit in and if you want to brave the mosquitoes to get in. And another bear sighting, which is a bear mother and cub off the side of the road, where the mother shooed the cub up a tree as I drove up. So in Watson Lake, there's a sign forest, which was started during World War II, and then has rapidly expanded since then, of people putting in signs from their hometowns. It was originally people who were soldiers who were building the Alaska Highway during World War II, put up signs of my hometown's this many miles that way or that way. And now there are like 90,000 signs all over the place. I, of course, had failed to remember to bring a sign from Los Alamos. So someday I need to go back and bring a sign or a sticker or something and put it on there from Los Alamos. So near there, I stopped at this little museum, the George Johnson something museum, where George Johnson is the guy on the right of the picture there, who lived there in the like 1920s, 30s, and subsequent years. But in the 20s and 30s, he was a trapper, and he decided that he wanted a car. There were no roads. You could only get there by water or by overland, but he wanted a car. And so he saved up his furs and he went to Yellowknife or to Whitehorse and he ordered himself a car and they delivered it by barge. And he got some of his friends to build a few miles of road so he could actually drive his car on a road. He mostly used it for hunting on the lake when it froze in the winter. And so every winter he would paint his car white so it would be camouflaged and he could go out hunting. And then every summer he would paint it back black because he thought it looked nicer. And he was also an amateur photographer, so the museum is all of his photographs from life there in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And then in like 30 years after he initially bought the car, he traded it back in at the dealership for a pickup truck. And the dealership said it was a perfect condition, aside from the many, many layers of paint. And knowing that this was a historic thing, they kept it, and that's the car that now is at the museum that they've restored. But it's a neat snapshot of life in that time when it was so incredibly isolated, and they weren't really connected to the rest of the world until the Alaska Highway went through in World War II. So there's a random sand dune section by Carcross, where I don't know the exact geology reasons for why that one particular place is sand dunes, but it's very bizarre. You just drive up from the middle of nowhere, and oh look, there's a bunch of sand. And then in Dawson City, there's you can park your float plane up along the dock. Okay, so then this is going up the Dempster Highway, which is my first trip up to the Arctic Ocean. This is without a doubt my favorite part of the trip. The whole Dempster Highway in general, and specifically the Tombstone Territorial Park, which is on the southern end of the Dempster. It's just beautiful. I mean, there's nobody around. It's gorgeous mountains and wide open spaces, and it's beautiful. And Tombstone is the kind of park where there's about 3 front country trails, which I have now done, and then everything else is backcountry. So someday I need to go back up there and do some of the backcountry. But on this trip, I wasn't intending to do backcountry stuff. So I did the 3 or 4 mile, well, it was like 3 or 4 miles one way, hike up to the viewpoint on the top, had my lunch there, and then continued driving north. And I have lots of pictures of Tombstone because I like the mountains. There's all these tors sticking out, the rocks sticking out inside the mountains, which I'm just oddly fascinated with. I just like how they look. It's kind of cool to see. There's just lots more variety that I feel like you get in mountains in other parts of the world. And there's also a lot of these warning signs for motorcyclists to be aware of conditions on metal bridge decks and slippery roads and stuff like that. So about halfway up the Dempster, there's I'm completely blanking on the name of the place, but it's a truck stop basically. But it's the place where you can camp about halfway up. And there it was really windy, so I camped in my car, which is the picture in the bottom left. That's at about 11:45 p.m. The sun was not yet set. That's just south of the Arctic Circle by like 10 miles or something. It's pretty close to the Arctic Circle. And also around there and a couple of parts of the trip, you see these signs about watch for aircraft, because the only place you can land around there is the road. And so there's sections where they've widened the road and made sure it's straight for a while. So should anyone need to make an emergency landing, that's where they go, because you can't land on the tundra. So this is another, there's 2 ferries on that road up to Tuktoyaktuk, which again, in the winter, they're ice roads. In spring and fall, it's just not passable for a while the ice freezes or thaws. And one of the ferries is just a straightforward point A to point B. It's a cable ferry. The other one is a 3-point ferry, where there's like the main road where I was going goes across one way, and it's an intersection of 2 rivers. And then there's this little town of Sigachik, which is the name in the middle there, which I had to ask how you pronounce it because I didn't know. But the ferry goes between the 3 corners of the intersections of the rivers. And so when you get on the ferry, you just have to tell them where you're getting off so they can arrange the cars appropriately so everybody can get on and off. And then all the ferry landings along the whole trip, there's pretty much invariably earth-moving equipment, because it just washes out continually. And so they have to keep remaking the ramps so that you can drive up and down. Okay, so this is just another map of the next approximately 3 weeks, where I started. So this is Tombstone, well, where I left off on pictures is not quite up to Tuktoyaktuk. So this is the Arctic Ocean, stop number 1, or time number 1 in Tuktoyaktuk, which is a tiny little town way up there. I actually stayed in Inuvik, which is a couple hours south of the Arctic Ocean, which is a slightly larger town, which has about 3 restaurants. I got a list at the tourist center of like things to do and places to go and places to eat in town, and the places to eat in town included the coffee shop at the airport and the cafe at the hospital as options. And then there was one hotel that has a restaurant, and then another like fast food restaurant separately. And then Alastein's, which is their kitchen is in an old bus, and they do fried fish until they run out. And then they have an indoor seating area that's 3 tables in a room that's 10 by 10 or something, maybe this tiny little inside area, but that's the place to go in Inuvik. So I stayed there, and then my plan was to stay in Inuvik for about 5 days and see what the road conditions are, because the road from there up to Tuktoyaktuk is relatively new. It's like 8 or 9 years old. Before that, it was a winter road only, and now it's a year round. And so I was very unsure about what the conditions would be like. So I figured I would get there, ask around, see when I wanted to go north. And then it was supposed to rain for pretty much the whole time I was there. So I decided, well, I should just go for it. The first day I was there, because the roads were probably going to get worse. So this was rainy day, number 1, driving up on a fairly muddy road to see the ocean and walk around and see the pingos, which are the hills in the middle picture there, where if I try to describe the exact formation mechanism, I will get it wrong. But it says something along the lines of there's a small pond that gets frozen and then buried under soil, and then continues freezing and expands and forms a hill. I'm sure you can find more information online or talk to an actual geologist who knows what they're talking about. But it's an Arctic feature all over the road, but there's a whole bunch of them around there, and there's a Pingo National Landmark site there. So this is in Inuvik. There's a community greenhouse where they have what is advertised as the northernmost apple trees. There's 2 little trees, which I have no reason to believe that's wrong. All of the utilities have to be above ground because of the permafrost. So the pipes in the top right, those go all through town and carry all the utilities, water and sewage and electrical and everything in there. So I'm Catholic, so part of my trip was finding Catholic churches along the way. The Catholic church in Inuvik is shaped like an igloo, which is great. And then the picture on the bottom then is that's the table at Alastein's decorated with Canadian pennies, as Canadian pennies are no longer a thing. They don't make them anymore. So then I decided a couple of days after to do another trip up to the Arctic Ocean, which is a couple hours north and a couple of hours back south, because the weather was nicer. There was some sun. I figured it would be, why not? So I went back up. So this is the same kind of, the top picture is Tuktoyaktuk, and the bottom 2 pictures as well, with a little bit more sun coming through, marginally. One thing I've always been fascinated with is just the parts of the world where, like, you look at a map or an aerial picture, and there's a kind of gradual transition between lakes and ponds and rivers and islands. And this is one of those parts of the world where you're driving along and there's just more water and more water and more water and more water, and eventually you're at the ocean and then there's islands out there. And just really interested with that transition. The picture in the middle is that's the darkest it got in Inuvik. That's at like 3 a.m. When I was up there, the end of July, the sun set technically for a couple hours, but it never got dark. So this is driving back south. Then somebody in Inuvik had told me that there was a music festival along the way in Fort McPherson, which is this tiny little settlement, which I stopped at briefly. And the picture in the top left there, you can kind of see there's a little shelter or like pavilion on the far side of that lake, which is where it was. But I didn't stay for very long because it was just kind of awkward, because it was really extended family reunion fishing camp rather than music festival. So me as the random American tourist wasn't really the place to be. I mean, they were perfectly welcoming people. It was just not. I mean, it was a family reunion. That was cool. And so then this is in the middle there. This is camping again at Eagle Plains, where their campground was technically full. They said, "Oh, you could just park wherever and set up camp. It's fine." So I said, "Okay," and found and picked a place right up along the edge where I had a nice view. This is back in Tombstone Territorial Park, where I camped for another couple days and did a really interesting ranger walk and learned all about lichens, which they have all sorts of varieties, which I didn't know anything about. The white lichens and the middle left there is caribou lichen, which is what the caribou eat in the winter, or at least largely what they eat in the winter, which I hadn't realized was the thing. And I did another hike that I did there. It was about probably 8 miles round trip, a couple of 1,000 feet up. Beautiful. It was what the hike is meant to do. You go up and over a ridge and then have a nice viewpoint over a lake. I got almost to the top of the ridge and it started raining and then it started sleeting, and then the drop off kept getting steeper on the sides of the trail, and I decided this is a really great place to turn around. So I didn't quite get to the lake overview. Someday, if I'm back there and it's nicer weather, I will try again. But that was also beautiful. So this is one of the signs I saw that I liked the most on this trip. We should have those signs around here. This is by Dawson City, where there's all that was the gold mining, early 1900s, late 1800s, and so it's a dredge there at the top, and from the dredging and all of the mining, there's mine tailings everywhere, like just massive piles of gravel along the roads and all over the place. And I guess this isn't a wonderful portrait, but the bottom left there is my car after coming down the Dempster with a fair amount of mud. It got worse later in the trip, but that was the first muddy spot. Okay, so this is going into Alaska. So clearly it was a cloudy day up at the top. So it's going across the top of the world highway, which goes west from Dawson City across. And then into Alaska. There, the Canadian part of the road was paved, kind of, or it used to be paved, would be a better way of describing it. That was one of the rougher roads I drove on because it was just pavement in chunks and all sorts of potholes and fun things. And then you get to the border into Alaska, and they clearly just done a paving project. And the first 20 miles of US road is just pristine condition, and then it deteriorates rapidly. But the first impression of the US there is really good because brand new road. And then Chicken, Alaska, which is the giant chicken there. Where the story there, at least supposedly, is that they wanted to name the town Ptarmigan and couldn't agree on how it was spelled. So they called it Chicken instead. And so now there's multiple, it's a tiny little town, but there's a couple of gas stations, truck stop, campgrounds, type places, and they all have chickens. So this is in Fairbanks, where I spent a couple of days and then Wes flew in. So another good sign, which is from Creamer's Field there, which is a wildlife area where the cranes, that's one of Wes's pictures up on the top. Also, there's a large animal research center run by the University of Fairbanks where they have reindeer and musk oxen. And so the top right picture here is blurry, bad picture, but it's a baby musk oxen chasing a crane out of its enclosure. So you can't really tell very well in this picture, but there's a crane in kind of the bottom left of the picture. And the musk ox is just starting to charge towards the crane to make it fly away. There's also, so the town of North Pole is just south of Fairbanks. And so they, of course, have a massive tourist trap where you can go and buy all of the possibly Christmas-themed things you could want. There's a giant Santa Claus, there's reindeer, there's all sorts of stuff. There is also, oddly to my, well, I don't know the history of this, but Fairbanks has a whole bunch of really good Thai restaurants. They have a ton of Thai restaurants. And one of the places, so Wes and I went to dinner one night at the thing in the middle here is a food truck, in quotes, which is a Thai restaurant, which is actually pretty good. but looks highly sketchy. And then this is the best view that I had in the trip of Denali from Fairbanks with Wes's massive camera. But when we were in Denali later in the trip, it was cloudy, so you didn't actually see the mountain. But from Fairbanks, nice view. All right, so then from Fairbanks, this is where we started heading north again up the Dalton Highway, which is the haul road up to the oil fields on the North Slope. This is pretty much all along the trip, but especially this road, the roads were a lot better than I expected. Like, you read all the stuff about, well, his trip planning and stuff, and I can only figure that a lot of that trip, guidebook information and stuff is geared at people who have no clue how to drive on a gravel road. They've never, they're from a big city, they've never driven on a dirt road, they've never driven on a gravel road, they have no clue how to do this. And so, yes, they should be warned. But at least in my experience, and maybe we just got really lucky with timing and stuff, but it was not, I mean, there were a couple vaguely sketchy bits.
Yeah,
but
it was definitely much better than many of the roads through the Haymitz, for example,
yes,
that are much
definitely,
sketchier.
Definitely.
That's what I was expecting, is like back roads Haymitz for 550 miles, but it was much smoother.
With massive trucks going in both directions at all times. Because that was the other thing that I had heard, even from people who've done it, that there's all sorts of trucks going back and forth, and so your windshield's going to get broken and everything. But there weren't that many trucks, and that was probably just coincidence of, I'm sure at times there's more than others, but it was good. I didn't get a single flat tire. I got 3 chips in my windshield, which were all at one time from one truck going past me on the way into Inuvik. Got those patched up just fine. I was astounded. So this was, we started going on the Dalton Highway, and we're seeing no wildlife whatsoever. Like, we saw some crows and nothing else for hours. It's kind of ridiculous. And stopped at this nice little lake in the bottom left, which just looked like there should be a moose standing over there and some birds over there, and there was nothing. So then a little bit past that, then we saw this moose, mama moose and baby moose, who you can the baby moose is behind the mama's head, peeking over there off the side of the road, which was our first moose sighting on that stretch. And then the bridge at the top here and the picture at the bottom are the Yukon River that you go across. So it's a wooden bridge, or a wooden deck bridge across the Yukon. And in the bottom picture, there is a guy who had a raft, who's going down the Yukon in his raft. So this is our camp halfway up. Not pictured as the rain. This is where I discovered that I brought 2 tents on the trip with the intention of both having a backup and so that we could have 2 separate tents for this section. And I discovered this night that the rain fly on my tent just soaked through, which I hadn't encountered before, oddly. So that was fun. And then I got a new tent in Fairbanks and it was fine. But this is at Coldfoot, about halfway up, is where we camped. I don't remember the name of the campground, but it's a campground just north of Coldfoot. Because the other option is to camp at the truck stop, which is Coldfoot. And that was not appetizing because that's a parking lot, which was flooded. So like, oh yeah, that's camping over there where there's literally like inches of water on the ground.
And in Coldfoot, sort of 250, 300 miles from either Prudhoe Bay or Fairbanks. That's the only gas town along the road.
Yes. Yeah, that's where you stop. And this is the picture on the top right is the interagency, whatever, visitor center, which I don't remember all the agencies are, but that's the visitor center for all the national parks and
Gates of the Arctic National Park, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and one other entity they forget.
Yes, that just have a joint one single visitor center there. Which we went to a presentation there by one of the rangers who talked about his solo winter snowshoeing trip through Gates of the Arctic for like 4 weeks, it seemed kind of odd because all of the they are telling you repeatedly, don't go by yourself, travel in a group, make your plans ahead of time, make sure people know where you're going, have your GPS or some way of calling for help if you need to, and all of this. And then the ranger's just talking about he did none of those things. I mean, I'm sure he knew precisely what he was doing. I'm not saying that he was clearly he was experienced and knew how to travel in the backcountry and all of that. But he just kind of, oh yeah, I just went for several weeks. Had some really great pictures of mountains and gates of the Arctic in the winter. And so this is driving north from there. If you ever drive up there, it's definitely worth going at least a little bit further than Coldfoot, because you see the mountains and stuff here are, it just gets much better just north up there, and then continuing on north. So picture in the middle here, that's part of the pipeline, which of course parallels the road all the way up. I don't know why, and we asked when we did the tour at the Prudhoe Bay, and they couldn't tell us an answer, but parts of it are above ground and parts of it are buried. And there seems to be no rhyme or reason as to which parts are above ground and which parts are buried. And we asked when we did the tour at Prudhoe Bay and didn't know. And the tour guide helped build the pipeline, and they couldn't answer either. So who knows? But so these mountains are probably 5,000 feet, something like that tall, which just seems bizarre. So here's the fun road. So the top left here is what we thought was Adigan Pass when we started driving up it, because that's the pass over the
Brooks Range.
Yes, thanks. Which is the last major pass up and over, and then you're in the North Slope. So start going uphill, and this must be the pass. So this is fine. This is not a problem. Note that good road. And then you get up and over. No, this is not Adigan Pass. Then it was raining a bit. It was snowing a bit. There's snow on the road. The road is
It's kind of foggy.
Very foggy. When we got up to the top of the pass, you could see not very far in front of the car. There were a couple places where we probably would have stopped to take pictures, and I was not stopping the car. Just continue on, or I'm gonna be skidding all over the place. So, but even that being said, I mean, it was slippery, but the top right is the road, probably near the top of the pass.
Yeah, it's getting close to the top.
So, and you can see it's a good road. I mean, it's slippery, but it's not like massively potholed or anything. And there's guardrails, and it's good. And then you're up and over the pass, and then it's flat. And you're pretty watching that's the North Slope and plains. And all sorts of, I mean, we saw a ridiculous number of rainbows on the trip, which hadn't occurred to me. But yeah, I mean, there's sun and rain, you're gonna get rainbows. So that's the thing. And then the bottom picture is just south of Dead Course, coming in probably at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. But the sun's still up, the sun is not set. But interesting cloud formations. So I guess the short version of the story is we were originally going to spend 2 nights in Coldfoot. I vetoed that because my tent went through and I didn't want to be wet for another night. And we were going to stay at this Airbnb in Dead Horse, which was a couple of shipping containers put together that there's a company that does like water testing stuff up there, and they have these shipping containers put together, which is both the office space and lab space and 3 little bedroom and bathroom combinations. And so they have 1 staff member there at any given time and rent out the other 2. So we were going to stay there. So we were able to arrange a second night to stay there and drive up a day early, which was great. And then had a day to hang out in Dead Horse, which is not a thing you do.
It is not a town.
No.
If you like, Los Alamos is a company town. This is a company town to another level. There's 1 store. It's sort of auto parts, general stuff, a few souvenirs, but there's no groceries, oddly.
No.
There's no grocery store in town. The closest groceries are basically Fairbanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's cafeterias.
There's 1 cafeteria.
Yeah.
So it's all oil workers who live in this hotel provided by the company, eat at the company cafeteria. It's very much a single company town, or multiple companies, but contracted out. And
it's weird.
It's weird.
And so the day that we spent there, the full day, we drove back south a bit because we'd come in late, and so we hadn't spent any time really looking around along the last stretch of the road. And the last stretch of the road was rebuilt like 10, 15 years ago, and so it is gloriously nicely paved. And so that was not a problem. And saw some musk oxen up there, which is pretty awesome. I think I got a picture on the way back down of those. And yeah, the necessary picture of muddy car there in the middle. It's on the way up. The picture on top right is that's at the general store, the end of the highway sign where everybody sticks their stickers and stuff. Yeah, 807. Yeah. So at the oil fields, they have a little mini refinery where they refine diesel for the use of the oil companies and their contractors, but they cannot sell that to people who are just there. So all of the gas and diesel that is for sale for those of us visiting gets trucked up from Fairbanks. So it's very expensive. And then the only way to go to the actual Arctic Ocean, you can't drive there because it's all behind the security fences of the oil field, is you do a tour where you get in a van and they drive you up and you see all the oil equipment and then you see the ocean. And if you're a crazy person, you jump in the ocean. I am not a crazy person.
I was apparently the only person on the tour that was crazy enough to go all the way in.
Yes. So not pictured as Wes actually in the ocean, but him with the shorts and the towel are post Arctic Ocean dip. Because the part of the tour is they provide towels if you want to. Yeah, but that's the thing that people do. So they expect that and bring towels. Okay, so this is wildlife and such on the way down. And one picture of me taking a picture of Wes taking a picture of muskoxen. It works out pretty well where I could like drive slowly along because there's never any traffic, and Wes could lean out the window and take pictures.
Yeah, that's an Arctic groundhog on the right.
Ground squirrel?
Yeah, ground squirrel.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
ground squirrel.
Yeah, and it was bow hunting season for caribou up there. So while we saw caribou, we also saw a fair number of hunters going out in search of the caribou.
Which seems incredibly challenging because there's no cover. You're just walking on an empty plain and trying to stalk caribou with a bow.
Which must work, or they wouldn't expect there to be that many people. But there's also rules about how close to the pipeline you can get if you are hunting with a bow or a rifle or whatever, because there's security stuff. So this is on the way back. We stopped both ways actually. We stopped at Galbraith Lake it's a campground rest area that we stopped at. On the way up, mostly use the bathrooms, see what there is to be seen. But then on the way south, we stopped and did a hike. So before we went on the trip, we talked about the gates of the Arctic National Park, which is right off the road on the way up there, on the other side of the river for most of the way. I had vetoed the plan of fording the river because neither of us have any business fording an Alaska River. We don't know how to do that properly because you have to do it on foot. It's not to go across in your car, of course. It's gates of the Arctic. You can get there by walking or by helicoptering or getting flown in or rafting in or whatever on the rivers, I think. But Wes found a corner where you could get to the gates of the Arctic, we think, without fording a river, starting from the Galbraith Lake. So we started there and hiked for probably 7-8 miles round trip, just off trail going that way with our maps and GPS thing. And whether we literally were within the bounds or not, who knows? But we're going to say that we were. I think it's close enough. According to us comparing GPS maps and stuff, I think we were on the corner.
When we stopped at the visitor center, in Coldfoot, there's only 7,500 people actually go into the park each year. So, for the trip you guys have planned to the Gates of the Arctic with Tanya, I don't expect to see other people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but that was pretty cool. I mean, that's one of the very few times I've done an actual, entirely off-trail hike because there's no trails there. Just kind of, let's go that way and try not to get bogged down. So it's a balancing act of, staying, not wanting to go too high up, but staying on the rocky bits rather than the boggy bits. This is going across Adigan Pass, going south, when it was not precipitating, and so the road was much nicer. The picture on the bottom here and the top left, those are around midnight, a little before, where the sun was just setting or coming down. So that was a crazy long day because we got up like 7 or something to go on the tour up to the Arctic Ocean, and then started driving south and did our hike, and then kept on trekking to get to Wiseman to spend the night there, and got it there at like midnight, a little after 12:30 maybe. Then had dinner out there and then went to sleep. And if you go there, I don't actually remember the name of the place, but the place we stayed in Wiseman, I don't recommend. Perfectly fine as far as cleanliness and everything goes. I threw out my back on the bed. So if you like really cushy like cot beds that go like this, great place to stay. Otherwise, go for a campground. So this is coming back south, back across the Arctic Circle. The picture on the top right is a short hike from the campground we stayed at on our way up. You hike like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's really short. Yeah, beautiful little view over the river and mountains and stuff. So this is in Denali. How are we doing for time? I'm not paying any attention. Is anyone? Are we okay? Okay, and we're aiming for. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm not going way too slow on things. Okay, I'll keep going. I'll keep going. Okay, so this is a Denali.
So we technically say that the we go until 8:30, but we want to include questions if there are any at the end.
Okay. The last part of this trip, there were fewer pictures because it rained a lot. So I think we'll get there. So this is in Denali. We stayed there for 2 nights.
2 nights.
2 nights. And so you can drive the first like 15 miles into Denali, and in the past there you have to take a bus to get in further. Usually you can go like 100 miles in, but in 2021 there had been a big landslide, which is the top left picture there. That's where there was a landslide, and there is no road there for a section. And so now you can only go in like another 30 miles.
Mile 42 is the landslide. On
the bus. And then basically the bus can take you out to the last place where they could possibly turn around the bus. And then you can walk out the last couple of miles of the road, which is what we did from there, and to where the landslide happens. And it's gorgeous views and stuff. I will say, so with the buses, you had the option of the much more expensive narrated tour, which is like $100 or something, more than $100, I think, a person. Or you could just do the whatever they call it, backpackers bus or something, which they said was the non-narrated version that you can just go, but you can get on and off wherever you want. So we did the much cheaper, it was like $25-$30 non-narrated version. I think we got just as much narration as we could have wanted, because I mean anyone who has that kind of job as a bus driver in Denali is going to want to talk about things. And so we heard all about the Dall sheep, and that's why Denali exists, and all the what to see along the way and history and stuff. It's really cool. And then the bottom left is right near our campground. How obvious it is here. There's a nice caribou there who we sat and took pictures of for extended periods of time. And if we should have put one of those close-ups here. Is that caribou? Okay, so this is that same caribou, zoomed in. And it was just ignoring us quite happily. Didn't care that we were standing there. So the top picture is a caribou that walked right up to our bus when we were stopped. And so then, of course, everyone is crowding in to take pictures. The top right is some Dall sheep, which you can kind of identify as little white smudges. And that's with your big fancy camera. So they're way up in the mountains from there.
And those are the reason they designated the park as a park, was to preserve the sheep.
Yeah.
That was the sole reason originally for pushing for the park.
Yeah. Because they were in danger of all getting hunted by people wanting to eat them, or wanting to hunt them to feed the miners, I think was the thing going on. Saw some nice fat marmots, and the pika there is also, but those are both like out at the end of the road in Denali. And then what kind of bird?
It's a golden eagle.
So these are more of your wildlife pictures. The bear, I think, is actually your second picture, back up to Denali later. And the moose in the middle too. The moose at the bottom was also about the same place as that caribou earlier, right by our campground. And this moose was far enough away that we weren't concerned, but it was kind of looking at us sideways of don't come any closer.
So moose are the most dangerous animal in the park as far as injuries to people.
Yes.
It's not the bears or the wolves.
Yeah, I don't remember what the numbers were, but there's signs, telling you, stay this far away from moose and caribou and bears and whatever. And the moose is the longest distance you're supposed to stay away, which is kind of surprising.
Wolves are surprisingly close.
Yeah. which it might also be a factor of how likely you are to encounter such animals. But okay, so then after Denali, we both, well, my parents had flown up there and spent a few days in Denali beforehand, and then we met up in Anchorage, and Wes's mom flew in to Anchorage as well. And then we kind of split off onto our own separate parallel trips for a bit. But Wes and I both did this glacier kayaking tour out of Homer, which was pretty cool. It was really cold. It was raining most of the trip. So I got to prove that my raincoat actually worked well. So that was useful. But it was you took a water taxi across from Homer into Tuktoyaktuk Bay State Park. I think it's a state park. And then you did a bit of a hike, and then they have a cache of their inflatable kayaks, which you have to inflate. And then you get to kayak around on the little glacier lake for a while, and then you deflate the kayaks and hike back over. So the picture on the left in the middle here, we climbed when we were kayaking, there's a little like viewpoint you hiked up to and back down. And there was this thing there, which is some sort of scientific measuring device. If anyone has any ideas on what this might be, I'm curious, because none of us had a clue. It looks like it's just like a couple of Nalgene bottles attached to a post. But I don't know. So more, these are all your pictures, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Say where these were.
Yeah, so these were mostly around Seaward. So you kind of go back up the Kenai Peninsula and around to Seaward. Then we went on a cruise. It was cut short because it was very stormy. It was raining and large swells, so it was a little bit shorter than intended. But yeah, I forget what type of whale it is in the center top.
Those are belugas, right?
Yeah, I think beluga.
The top one, yeah.
The smaller white ones are
Right.
beluga whales near Anchorage. And then there's stellar sea lions, harbor seals, and puffin at the bottom. And then at Homer, at the Airbnb, the sandhill cranes just flew in and sat on the lawn right off the deck.
Almost ran into a couple driving back in that evening. They were just hanging out in the middle of the driveway. So yeah, these are yours too.
Yeah, and so then we separately went to Durango St. Elias National Park. So this is a glacier about halfway between Anchorage and the park. I'm blanking on the name of it now. But and Durango St. Elias is another park where it's mostly off-road. There's one road that you can take in, and if you can read the sign at the bottom, it basically says they don't recommend driving on the road that gets you into the park. But I did it in my room.
There may be railroad spikes.
Yeah, there's railroad spikes and other issues. I did it anyways in my rental car. Probably not advised.
I did it in my non-rental car, and it was fine. It wasn't that bad of a road.
It was, again, I think overhyped is how bad it was. I mean, it wasn't a great road, but it wasn't that bad.
Well, it probably neither of us went all the way in. I suspect it gets worse as you go further. So this is Exit Glacier and then Harding Ice Field, which is just north of Seward, which is probably after Tombstone. This is the next favorite hike that I did on the trip. It's about the same length and elevation as hiking up Wheeler Peak. It's like 8 miles round trip and 3,000 something feet, but you're starting from sea level. So it is so much easier because you can breathe the whole way up. And it's a really well-constructed trail all the way up too. And it wasn't, I mean, there were plenty of other people hiking, but it wasn't crazily busy. And it's beautiful. I mean, I was getting worried as I was getting closer up because the clouds were pretty far down. And I was worried that I would get to the top and you just wouldn't be able to see anything. And that would just be highly disappointing because you can see like little glimpses of the glacier and the ice field as you go up. But then you get to the top and there's the ice field, which is the top picture. And so while I'm sure it is much more spectacular if you somehow are magically there on a clear day, it was pretty cool, even with the overcast. So this is the map for the last 3 weeks of my trip, which is, coming all the way up south. So this is, with my parents, I did shoot, what was the number? It's like a 36 glacier cruise out of Whittier, where Whittier is a little town of which you have to, the only way to get there is through this long tunnel, which is a single lane tunnel, which is shared between cars and trains. And so it's a timed thing where you line up on either side. And for, however it's organized, that like there's 15 minutes of each hour where traffic goes this way, 15 minutes traffic goes this way, and the other half hour is for trains. And so you have to, time, and then it's closed overnight. So you have to time your, arrival and departure. But that's where the cruise went out from. And we didn't actually see all of the glaciers because there were a couple of fjords that we couldn't go down to go through due to fog. But no disappointment whatsoever. I mean, the glaciers we did see were beautiful. And it's a big enough, it wasn't a huge ship, but there was plenty of indoor seating. So you had the option of just sitting inside pretty much the whole time if you wanted. They give you little squeegees for the windows, so you can see outside. So the picture, that's me with my parents on the bottom, where mom and dad pretty much sat inside the whole time. I sat out on the deck, and then they came out for a picture and then retreated back into the warmth. So by Valdez, there's salmon. That's where that started. There's a salmon hatchery, and so because that's where they hatch, then that's where the salmon come back to, and lots and lots and lots of salmon, just crazy amounts. I'd never seen that kind of spawning salmon before. It's just a weird sight. And here there's some sea lions who had found their spot where all the salmon are coming in, and they were just hanging out and gorging on the salmon, and just completely ignoring all the people who were sitting around snapping pictures, because what do they care? They've got a feast right there. So this is driving back. So I went down from there, then I drove over to Haines and across to Skagway. But to get there, you have to go from Alaska into Yukon, into British Columbia, into back into Alaska, and then you come back up. So lots of border crossings. Where, fun fact, bear spray is legal to carry into Canada. Pepper spray is not. So at two border crossings, I was specifically asked whether I had the big bear spray canisters or the little pepper spray canisters. And so I said, the big bear spray canisters, you're fine. But I guess the small canisters are a concealed weapon, and so they're illegal. Can't bring them with you. So fun things along the way, along that drive down to Haines. There's a number of churches that are made from concept huts, which, they're tiny little buildings that they've built fake fronts onto to look more church-like. It's a thing in Canadian national parks where they put these red Adirondack chairs at scenic viewpoints. So as a, I don't know when they started it, probably a decade or two ago, but there's all sorts of places around where you can go sit on the red Adirondack chairs and enjoy the view, where those chairs are looking out over the view at the bottom there. And then in Haines, there's a hammer museum, which is the giant hammer. Sadly, the hammer museum was closed when I was there in Haines, so I was not able to go inside. But I feel like I probably got the best experience just by seeing the giant hammer. So then I took the ferry across from Haines to Skagway, which is up the fjord, beautiful views on all sides. And then in Skagway, there were 3 cruise ships docked there when I was there. Skagway is this tiny little town of at most 2-story high buildings, and then there are these massive cruise ships that just dwarf everything in town. The optics are completely ridiculous. And in the tiny little town, all the cruise ship, there's a gradient of cruise ship passengers where the first block is packed, and then it very rapidly drops off where people just don't bother to walk further than that. So if you go past the first block, it's a really nice little town that you can explore and see all the little shops and stuff, and it's not massively crowded. And one of the shops has a scrimshaw exhibit where they've collected all these carved pieces of mammoth ivory and walrus tusks and all that sort of stuff. And so this is a carving on a mammoth tusk of people hunting mammoths. Just some nice circular logic. So this is back in Canada, then in Whitehorse, which is where you go north from Skagway, end up in Whitehorse, which the Yukon River in the middle there. That canyon used to be deeper and more impressive before there was a dam. Now there's a dam. So I think I mentioned earlier in passing that there used to be giant beavers, which I had not realized were a thing, in the Ice Age. And giant beavers were about 6 feet long or tall, however you want to think about that. And so they had their, the social distancing wasn't encouraged when I was there, but they still had some of their signs about, what does distancing look like. And in some cases it would tell you it's a deer or a moose or a giant beaver in this case. And then the skulls are a normal beaver on the left and the giant beaver on the right for size comparison. And there's legends with some of the native peoples about the giant beavers, which are actual passed down from 10,000 years ago legends. I mean, they're not realistic at this point because they've been translated through 10,000 years of people, but the belief is that those are actual cultural memories of these animals that were around, which is kind of cool to think about. So speaking of beavers, it's a little bit south of there, but I found a nice beaver pond to hike around and see the beavers going around with their, building their lodge. Also some nice graffiti at one of the rest stops on the bottom left there, which seems like a bad idea in general. And on the right is one of many areas, many burned areas that you drive through, because forest fires are a thing everywhere, and especially up there. Okay, so this is my favorite glacier. This is Salmon Glacier, where you get here by, so there's a little town of Stewart, British Columbia, and then a town of Hyder, Alaska, which is immediately adjacent to it, which is on the southeastern side of the Alaskan Panhandle. So you drive through British Columbia to Stewart, you cross the border into Hyder. There's no US customs going that way. You just cross the border. Then you cross a signed border back into British Columbia where there's no customs either way, and drive up this really sketchy mining road where there's still gold mining going on up there, up to the viewpoint over the glacier here, which is this gorgeous view where it's a ice field coming down the middle there and then splitting and going down both sides, and some bears on the way in. And then bears. So also in Hyder, Alaska, there's the Fish Creek Bear Observation Site, which is a place where they're spawning salmon in a creek, and they have constructed an elevated wooden boardwalk which is patrolled by rangers with pepper spray and shotguns, where you can watch the bears, who they said none of the rangers would give a straight answer about how frequently or whether they ever have to use the pepper spray or the shotguns. But they said the bears don't care. They've got salmon in front of them. What do they care about the people sitting there making noise? So my assumption is really that the rangers are mostly there to keep people from doing stupid things. And bears don't really care one way or the other. So some more bears. So this is down, so further south, British Columbia, and back out to the coast. So sorry, I'm ahead of myself. The top picture is in Stewart. There's this boardwalk that goes out into into the fjord. Really, it's all swamp and stuff. But just the combination of the fog and the boardwalk and the you're in the middle of nowhere, and then they have these old streetlights. It made me think of Narnia. I mean, it's not quite because there's not snow, but had that vibe for me for whatever reason. And at the little museum there, I learned that they used to put snowshoes on horses, which I hadn't realized was a thing. But in the early 1900s, when they were doing gold mining there, they didn't have trucks or anything to carry stuff around. I'm not entirely sure why they didn't use dogs, but I think it was just they didn't know how to work with dogs, but they knew how to work with horses. And so they bring horses in, and it was only some subset of the horses that they could train to walk as you need to with these massive snowshoes attached to your hooves. And then they'd use them to carry stuff around. So they'd have like flat wooden ones for walking on snow, and then like cleats for walking on glaciers. And all that stuff. And going further south, you can see the nice weather forecast there for rain, and more rain. And the day which was marked as 58%, that was not true. It rained all day. There was a lot of that going on. But I also felt like at this point it was, and in the coastal rainforest in British Columbia, it's supposed to be raining and it's fine. So out in Prince Rupert on the coast, the picture on the bottom left, their visitor center is all about advertising themselves as a wonderful port where you should bring all your commercial traffic to. And so they're advertising that they're the fastest route to Asia and telling you the shipping times between various ports on the western coast of Canada and the US and China, really. So this is around near Prince Rupert and inland from there, north and south, that whole area. There's, again, water everywhere and trees and moss and everything, which, you know, from New Mexico is very strange. And the artwork of the native people there is really interesting. There's a couple of museums. The picture at the bottom there, that's one of the visitor centers I stopped at, which is a not entirely accurate reconstruction of the buildings they used to build. And part of the not entirely accurate is that they would have much narrower entrances so that you couldn't enter while you were carrying armor or shields or anything. So it was a, a purposely narrow thing, so it was difficult to get into. They also made these bentwood boxes, which is the picture in the middle, where they would take one sheet or one piece of wood from the side of a living tree and then score it and steam it and bend it to make the box from one piece of wood. And then would only have like a couple joins to have to actually make. So they would make waterproof boxes, which they would then use for cooking, where you put water and hot stones in your box and fill your cooking in there. So as getting towards the end of the trip, then my sister flew into Vancouver. I picked her up there, and we spent part of a week east of there in the little town of Vernon, British Columbia, which is wine country down there. The first few days were beautifully forest fiery smoke everywhere, as you can see in the top picture. We're all familiar with what that looks like in the sky. There was a pretty big fire that had just started like the day before we got there. That was just west of Vernon. But then the wind shifted and we had a couple of smoke-free days too, which was really nice. So we spent our time, wandering around, hiking. We found a cidery that had live music by a band from Newfoundland called Wild Cod, which was pretty fun. We also discovered there was a gelato shop in Vernon, which had really good gelato. Their other location is in Florence, Italy. And randomly, we had to go there because my sister, when she was in college, studied abroad in Florence for a year. And this gelato shop was around the corner from where she lived. So, I mean, we didn't actually look it up. For all I know, there's dozens of these shops all over the world, and they just don't put them all on their sign. So it sounds more exclusive. But it's what are the chances of us randomly finding this place? So then this is my last slide of pictures. The rest of the trip home, which, as with going north, I pretty much beelined south from the Canadian border down. There was wildfire smoke through most of like Montana, Idaho, that area. I drove past a place that's top left there. There's a bed and breakfast in Idaho, which is shaped like a beagle. And so I didn't stay there, but for future use, that's could be a fun place to stay. And then I don't remember if the smaller beagle is actually a building or if that's just decorative, but the fire hydrant is a shed. To go along with the theme. And then, so the last night of my trip, then I camped by Monument Valley, Gouldings. There's a bottom left picture, my last campsite. And along the way to there, stopped at Goosenecks, which is just north of there. And of course, worth a side trip to go see. And then back into Los Alamos. And my final odometer reading at the bottom. So I had 16,390 miles all the way up and back. And and ending with the nice muskox picture, and that's yes.
So, you sounded like you were very fortunate in some mechanical issues. But what did you bring to be prepared for? Did you have time?
So the question is, how prepared was I to deal with mechanical issues with spare tires and such? So I had a full-size spare tire. I somewhat apprehensively made the decision not to carry 2 spare tires because a lot of stuff that I had read strongly recommended that you carry 2 full-size inflated spare tires. I decided not to. I had a couple of tire repair kits, like the plug things, and I had a pump so I could reinflate tires. I didn't have to use any of that at all. I had a basic toolkit and stuff. Not that I'm an expert on repairing stuff with the car, to be honest. Most of the trip, while I was in remote places, I wasn't completely out in the middle of nowhere. I was never that far away from someplace, a gas station, repair shop, where I could have. There were definitely a couple stretches, like both trips up to the Arctic Ocean and back. Those roads would have been rather pricey to have to get towed, but most other stretches I think would have been plausible to deal with if I had to. But yes, I was very fortunate with that. I made a point of practicing changing my tires before I went, because I hadn't had to change a spare tire in years and didn't have to use that skill. But now I know that I can. Yeah. So the question is, what did I bring with me to be prepared if I encountered a bear on a trail? So I had bear spray, is the main thing. I had bear bells, which I think is controversial whether that's actually a good idea or not. I mostly just went with the make noise method of hiking. I also made a point of doing trails where there would be other people. So I wasn't just literally hiking out in the middle of nowhere by myself. So that was the thing. When the hike that Wes and I did off trail in Gates of the Arctic, we were seeing scat of some large variety along the way, and realizing that we weren't entirely sure what grizzly bear scat looks like, and getting concerned. We realized after the fact that was muskox scat. It's fine, no problem. But I was lucky. I didn't see any bears out hiking at all. All the bears I saw were from the car or from the fishermen.
As I said, your options are more limited on like bringing a gun or anything, because you have to go through Canada, and that's problematic.
Yeah, and requires that you know what you're doing with a gun and all that stuff. Yeah, I mostly went with the do my research ahead of time to try to avoid situations where that would be a thing. Yeah, question from the chat.
Yeah, there's one question online. Did you find it easier to travel or drive longer days since it wasn't getting dark?
Yes, definitely. And largely, I think for me, it was more just the fact that I could travel and do things later, and we could travel and do things later and still see stuff. I mean, it's different driving when it's light out and seeing the scenery and being able to stop and do hikes versus driving when it's dark and you can't see what's going by. I didn't make any real attempt to be on a schedule for most of the trip. It was kind of just go to sleep, get up, whenever. And so there were definitely, especially on the dumpster highway, but most of the trip, it was kind of a fluctuating thing of, being up till 1 or 2 and then getting up at 6 because it's late and there's things to be done. And then the next day crashing at 7 o'clock because I'm exhausted and, Any other questions?
There's one more. Did you have a favorite animal?
Muskoxen. Yeah. I think largely because I hadn't realized that those are things you can actually see in the wild, which of course you can, but it just that hadn't entered into my mind, and so actually seeing them up there was pretty awesome.
Where have you seen the most stark effects?
So the question is, where did I see the most stark effects of climate change? The glaciers, definitely. So they're both in Jasper. You go past Columbia Ice Field, which is this massive ice field glacier, and there's there's a visitor center across the street, and then you walk across and can hike up to the foot of the glacier basically, and they have signs all along the way marking where the foot of the ice was from 1880 to now, and seeing that progression is crazy, and how much it's shrunk in the last 50 years is insane. And the same kind of thing with all the glaciers, but places where they had, I've never been to any of these places before, so I don't have a personal point of comparisons, but a number of places they have signs and pictures and stuff that, from whether it is intended as an illustration of climate change or just as here's pictures from 100 years ago. There was definitely some of those at the Salmon Glacier where they had pictures from the gold mining era in early 1900s, and just it's entirely different. The valleys are full of ice, and now it's this little glacier. There's a section on the road along there where they rerouted the road about 30 years ago because when they built the road initially 80 years ago, there was a glacier there in the valley, and so they had to build the road up on the side of the hill. And now there is no glacier there anymore. There's this little ice field over here, and so they rerouted the road right through the middle of the valley.
Yeah, I think actually some of the parks like Kenai Fords, it's moving back so fast that they almost can't keep up with moving the signs and the trail. It's the last signs from 10 years ago, and the glacier's now a quarter mile away. And
yeah, at the exit glacier north of Seward, there's a couple places where this is where there used to be a viewpoint of the glacier, but the glacier's not there anymore. So now you have to hike another half mile in, and then there's a viewpoint, and there's not actually a viewpoint from there because it's not there either. So you have to keep rerouting trails and stuff so you can actually see things. Yes.
Did they mention a plan for the road into the valley?
So the question is whether they mentioned a plan for the road into Denali. What we heard last summer is that they were just starting their engineering analysis of what are their options. So I don't know anything, and I
suspect it's not soon because there's like a small visitor center on the other side that they've completely abandoned.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
They're just letting it go into total disrepair, and they're not going to do anything on it in the meantime. So I think it's years to decades before they repair it, if they do.
Seeing the landslide in the road, I don't see how they could easily reconstruct it. I mean, it's just not stable. It's not like there's one little piece that washed out that they would need to rebuild. It's a whole stretch that's all the same kind of terrain and unstable, everything. So I have no real knowledge of what their plans are.
And there are a handful of lodges at the end that would really like it to open that are now fly-in only that, I think went up in a factor of 10 in price.
Yeah, but my parents had initially booked to stay for a week at one of those lodges out there before the road was closed. And I don't remember the exact numbers of what it was initially supposed to cost or whatever. But then when they were notified that we're still going to be open, but it's a fly-in thing, it was like $10,000 more just for that fact to get in and out. So I mean, clearly they're still open. People are willing to pay that, but it's a different clientele at that point.
Yep, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much again, Lucy and Wes, for sharing your adventures with us tonight. That was quite the epic road trip. And everybody, please remember to look out for the survey coming to your email. If you're interested in attending more Peak programs, look at our website. One of our biggest events of the year is the Backcountry Film Festival coming up this Thursday night. And I just heard there's like less than 10 tickets left. So if you really want to go, it's going to be an awesome night with a great raffle. And there's just a few tickets left to buy from Sala at the event center at the theater over there. So thanks again for joining us and have a good night.